Hey, it's Alan here.
And Bree.
And we are
the hunter and the hippie.
Connected through yoga and bonded by our love of the wild places and the love for outdoors, we've come together to share our conversations about life.
Well, maybe more so what we've learned or are continuing to learn about life.
And that there's no one way to do it. Life, that is.
And hopefully provide you with some teeny tiny bits of inspiration to connect deeper with yourself, others, and our great Mother Earth.
All right. Enough already about the podcast. Let's just get to the podcast. How's it going?
Good.
You had quite the day.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Or quite the evening, I should say, getting your hair done. Or redone, I should say.
Yes. We don't need to talk about that. But
Yeah.
How was your week?
Oh my gosh, my week was amazing. I can't wait to tell you all about it.
Nice.
It is. It has to do with our episode and our topic, hunting and our relationship with food.
Yes.
So I am so stoked. Yeah. So let's. Why don't you start us off as you normally would before we jump into it?
All right. So finding a comfortable seated position, and then finding a soft gaze or closing your eyes. And then take a few shifts from side to side in your seat. And bring some awareness into your connection points with the earth. So this might mean the back of your legs or the soles of your feet. It might be the connection to the chair or car, and then that connection to the earth. And as you feel these connection points, begin to imagine roots growing out in every direction. Feel the grounding of these roots, the support. And then from here, allow yourself to sit up a little bit taller. So maybe drawing your shoulders back. Maybe you feel a gentle pull through the crown of your head. And then bring some awareness into your natural breath. Noticing how it travels throughout your body. And continue imagining your roots spreading wide so that maybe you can sit even taller. Maybe sending your breath through these roots. And through the earth, through the roots, feel connection to others around you. Whether it's someone near you or across the country, or maybe it's someone you don't even know. Start to feel this connection to them through our connection to the earth. And through your breath, through these connection points, sending them some peace, some gratitude, some love. And allowing that same peace, that same love and gratitude to travel back up and fill your entire body. And just 3 deep inhales and open mouth exhales together. Deep inhale, fill all the way up. And big exhale to let it go. Again, taking in and giving back. Full expansion and complete release. From here, you can flutter your eyes open if they aren't already. And joining us back on our podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much, as usual.
Yeah, thank you.
So I know you're not wanting to talk about your hair, but I am intrigued. You not about your hair, but you mentioned we don't have to talk about your hair. But for everyone listening, we got our hair. Bree got her hair done. But that's not what it's about. She mentioned that she got chickens and eggs and stuff while she was getting her hair done. Just since this podcast is about food and our relationship with it, I just want to know a little more. So please expand.
So if you live in Cody, a little shout out to Claire Bowler at Bella Mia. I went to her for the first time as a recommendation from a good friend, and we were talking about her. She's like, yeah, I have a funny farm. And I was like, what animals do you have? She's like, I got a bunch of chickens, turkeys, a pony, like a pig. She's like naming all these animals she has, and she had brought eggs in for another woman who works at the salon, or not turkeys, she said ducks, that's what it was. And I had mentioned, I was like, I've never had duck eggs. Do they taste any different from chicken eggs? Mm-hmm. She's like, oh, they're like, the yolks are bigger, they're a little creamier. She's like, I'll send you home with some. And so when I left after my hair appointment, Claire sent me home with like a 12 pack of like chicken and duck eggs. So
nice.
And I mentioned to Alan, I was like, only in Wyoming do you go home from a hair appointment with like someone's like home chicken eggs, and it was just really cool. And I used to have chickens in Colorado, so it's very like near and dear to my heart, and that's something I want once I have the space and capacity to here in Wyoming and Cody. So yeah.
I would love to have chickens. Unfortunately, where I live, my HOA doesn't allow them. But yeah, the difference. I'm sure you know this, right? You've had chickens, but it's amazing the difference in like the color of the yolk. That and just the taste of an egg, like right from a chicken from your backyard. It's unreal. It's like this golden yellow color, versus when you buy it from the store, it's these dull yellow. So I've always wanted chickens as well.
They're pretty, for anyone who's interested, I think they're pretty low maintenance, and and I think the other part that I like is what they're eating. Right? So like we're talking about food today, and a big thing for me is like if you eat meat, you're eating what that animal eats. And so we'll dive into that more, but right, having your own chickens, you like know exactly what's going into them.
You're feeding them, right? I think that's a good point, that whatever they're eating, right, that's the whole GMO thing, right? Animals that are being fed GMOs and genetically modified organisms, that's what they're turning into, right? These animals are what they eat.
Well, if you want to get into GMOs.
Yeah, let's
We're
do
diving
it.
into this. I
Yes.
feel like we need, like, I'm so excited to hear about your hunting story.
I'm excited to tell you about the hunting story. I have so much to talk about today. So I mean, we could start wherever. I'm good with whatever we want to do.
Well, maybe I'm not a GMO expert, but I will give a little plug just for the basis that it is a buzzword.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
there's, I haven't read the book. I listened to a podcast with a woman who wrote Food Bullying, and it's about how we use certain buzzwords as like a marketing tool. And so you go to the grocery store and you see all these products that say non-GMO as a selling point. There are only 11 products, 10 crops, and one salmon is not, I don't think it's officially on the market yet as with GMOs, but there's only actually 10 crops that have GMOs that are genetically modified.
Yeah.
And so when you see like salt, non-GMO, that is just a buzzword marketing, and there's no salt that is marketed. Like,
right. It's salt.
Yeah.
It's salt. Literally. That's it. It's
but
salt.
then like tuna, like there's no GMO. There is no GMO version of tuna.
Yeah.
And so there is a website that really clarifies it. And some GMOs, I'm not saying yes or no to it, but some GMOs allow farmers to have like one spray round of Roundup versus having to spray it constantly. And so they're designed to help with pest prevention.
Got it.
And so sometimes like GMO gets a really bad rap. And again, I'm not going to say for or against, but it's definitely been demonized in, and I don't think it's as straightforward as, and again, I'm not an expert on it, but I find it like just hearing that, like find it pretty fascinating. So
and neither am I by any means, right? But the one thing I know is it's really new, and right, I don't think the research is out there to demonize it one way or another. And I think it's in more processed foods than more whole foods. I think that's the big thing, is where I've noticed it. So I love these like granola bars, and it says on the packaging, like, this is a genetically, I forget exactly what it says, but it says, right, this uses GMOs. And at first when I saw it, I was like, oh, I can't eat this. And then I was like, but it tastes so good, I don't care.
yeah.
And so I keep eating it. Cause again, I agree with you. Like, I think it is a buzzword, and I haven't seen any real issues with it on my end.
Yeah. And it's in like, I mean, it'll be in, it's in a lot of those like base crop, like soy, corn, exactly. And so anything that has like a corn product in it would potentially have it. But another one that is really interesting is apples that are sold already sliced. The way they've modified it is so that it doesn't turn brown. Packaged as it's like slices versus like, you know, if you think about if you slice your own apples over a day or two, they're going to turn brown in the fridge. So that's how they've like genetically modified it. And then again, that's like a reflection of the way that we look at food a lot, like aesthetically, and why like the bruised or damaged produce in a grocery store doesn't make it or sometimes doesn't even make it to the shelves.
Right.
Because we've become such an aesthetic culture when it comes to food.
For sure.
But
so
oh boy.
yeah. So like before we like get deep into this conversation, I feel like it was necessary. You and I text about this a little bit, but I feel like it was necessary to just mention this. First off, like eating disorders, they're a huge problem, and like go get the help if you're listening and like you have an eating disorder. Please like go see a doctor, get the help. Like by no means are we here to I can't talk about eating disorders because I've never had one. I'm not saying it's not common in men. I think it is actually more prevalent in men than we realize. In our text, the thing that you and I talked about is, right, like, we're just going to be talking about our views on our relationship with food. And we immediately started talking about, I think you had a friend reach out to you from India talking about like access to food. So I think that, some of the things we might say might come across as controversial, right? Quote, controversial. Mm-hmm. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But again, I feel like it's just important to get out there that, right, these are our views. These are our relationships with food, whether we've had or had them, and just our thoughts.
Yeah, and I think to build off of that, it's our own experience with it and maybe things we've heard or listened. And I'm not a nutritionist. I am not a biologist. I am not a researcher. I do care a lot about it and I look into it, and I'm very open for feedback around anything that's brought up. I also think it's, since we will be diving into hunting, I want to give like a little background because we might touch on certain things about food choices, but I was vegetarian for 7 years. I was vegan for 6 months out of that, and have at different points in my life like gone into like being an in-house vegan at times. I'm currently a meat eater. I eat a lot of meat and all the meats. But I like to put that background because I'm coming from a perspective of experience where like I have been in certain places and different views and relationships with the way that I eat. Yeah. But
that's great. And one of the things that I talk about in my yoga classes is the like how judgy people can get with diets and with food. I by no means, like, I don't care what you eat, right? I'm going to continue eating meat. I love meat. It is like the main staple of my diet is mainly meat. I wouldn't say I have any sort of like strict diet other than I like to eat meat and usually a carb like rice or potatoes or something like that. But I always talk about this in my yoga class, how it's interesting how judgy and judgmental people can be about their diets. And like, I'm a vegan, you need to be vegan too, and let me tell you why. Right. And the way that I talk about it in yoga, the reason why I bring it up in yoga is because I always talk about breath in yoga, because breath is really important. And I talk about how judgy people get with food and with what you drink. But no one judges you on your breath, right? I'm not saying we should judge people on how they breathe, but it's so funny how, right, you can live without food for 2-3 weeks, right? Ideal conditions, give or take. There's proof that, right, extremes that people have lived longer without that, but right, those are ideal conditions. And again, there's extremes. You can live without water for 3 days. And yet people judge you drinking soda, or you should drink this kombucha, or don't drink this, drink that, right? That type of thing. But your breath, you can only live without breath for like 5 minutes before like serious damage is done to your brain and your body. And yet no one's like, no, you should breathe like me. Right? No one's going around talking about, well, your breath is terrible. Let me show you science. Like,
like terrible, like smelly terrible, or we're getting into halitosis, or
right. Right. So I think it's funny, like how, food has this stigma to it, right? Like for us eating meat, right? People might look at us and be like, oh, like, you're not vegan, you're not vegetarian, whatever. Right? And I don't care. But my thought is, like, first off, you have to do what's best for you. And I think that's a big thing. Is you hear on like Joe Rogan podcast, he talks about, people who are only eating meat, like literal carnivores, meat eaters. That's all they eat is meat. And that might work for someone. Being a vegan might work for someone, being vegetarian, being, right, just, keto, whatever the diet is, or the way you eat is, that might work for you, but it might not work for someone else. And I think that's critical. So I think that's funny, and I just wanted to address those things before we get into, because I know I have strong feelings about what I'm about to talk about today, and it sounded like you did too. So,
and one thing just this time, since so we don't have to come maybe even back to this topic,
right.
but what you're bringing up of like what works for one person doesn't work for another,
Mm-hmm.
and part of I think this is a really fascinating observation, and so what I encourage through like listening to this conversation is just more awareness around your relationship with food, and then also how it makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was in Argentina at the start of the pandemic, the place I was staying was vegan,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not used to eating a lot of grains. That's not a big part of my diet, and I 3 weeks was eating vegan. We did end up, a few of us like got some special requests and got cheese from the store. So like having that kind of fat actually helped a lot. My system was pretty like not ideal. Like I didn't feel great during it. When I got back to the United States and I was waiting out before I moved to Wyoming, I kind of stayed vegetarian. And I wasn't really eating any meat, and I had the craziest sweet tooth. Like I am not necessarily a sweets person, but it was like dried fruit. I had the little Trader Joe's dark chocolate peanut butter cups, and I would like have 2 after dinner. That's not like a lot, but it was like I had to have like I had these weird cravings.
Yeah.
The moment I went to Wyoming, I was staying with a friend, and I literally had probably every type of wild game possible within a week, and I was eating predominantly like a meat heavy diet for that week. No sweet tooth.
The sweet tooth.
I had no cravings for anything. I actually like had a piece of chocolate to see if it still brought me what I wanted, like what it was, and it didn't. And I was like, there was something my body was missing that was being replaced with sweets, and then once I actually was getting whatever my body was missing, that craving went away. And so that's really like you might be most successful with a vegan diet. Just be aware, like see what's showing up, like see where your cravings are, see your energy level. If you are exploring different types of diet, like just be intentional with awareness around your choices. So
listen to your body. Your body communicates to you, and being aware of what your body's saying is important. And a lot of times we don't notice it until it's been a while. Like, oh wow, my body's been telling me this for a while, and I'm just noticing it. But I love that you bring that up.
So, because it kind of stems off that. So let's go to the hunting stuff.
So, all right. I'm so stoked. It was amazing. So I'm going to tell you about the whole day. So I've been hunting elk. I started hunting. Well, I wanted to hunt elk back. All right. So real quick, I'm going to go all the way back. I grew up in New York. Okay. New York City, where guns are bad. Okay. And that is a whole nother topic. We can talk about that a different day. And yeah, we can talk about that. Like, I'm down to absolutely have that controversial conversation. But I grew up, guns were bad, right? Like, we didn't have guns, right? Only the criminals had guns, that type of thing. Only police had guns. And when I was in my teenage years, we moved out to Arizona, and I was introduced to my friend, and, Arizona, there's a lot of gun-toting folks out there. And I was introduced to, a rifle, a hunting rifle by my friend and his dad. And we went out shooting it, and I was hooked. I was hooked for life. I was like, oh, wow, this thing goes bang. I love it. And his dad talked about hunting and hunting elk. And like in my mind, growing up in New York City, I had no clue where my food came from, right? My food came from the supermarket, and that's where food comes from, right? And that couldn't be further from the truth. So this idea of hunting and killing an animal was very foreign to me. I wasn't against it. I wasn't for it. I was just like, whoa, what is this thing? And wait, you're gonna go kill something, then you're gonna eat it? That's really weird. I just prefer my food dead already when I get it. So just growing up, in my teenage years, around guns and then hunting and tasting wild game, it was like, wow, this is amazing. This tastes way different than the stuff that I'm getting in the supermarket. And yeah, like I want to hunt. And hunting is really hard to get into. If you've never done it and you don't have someone who's done it before to like help you along the way, it's really hard to get into. So it's something I've never done. There's probably a bunch of excuses tied to that I made that I never got into it. But I finally got into big game hunting in 3 years ago. So 3 years ago was our first ever elk hunt, and it was just rifle, and we went out for 9 days, and hunting elk is very different than, I've done the research. I started to do the research. Hunting elk is very different than like hunting deer in the Midwest, whitetail deer, where like you go into a tree stand and you just sit there all day and you wait for an elk or a deer to come pass you by. People do that with elk hunting, but with elk hunting, especially public land, you are out there chasing them. You're out there trying to find them. And it is the hardest thing I've ever done. You are putting miles on in the craziest terrain. You're in the mountains of Colorado, the Rocky Mountains, and you are doing 10 miles a day with your camp. You start out with your camp on your back, you're hiking in, and then you're out there just surviving off of what you brought in with you, usually dry food. A lot of backpackers out there know that life. But usually dry food, and you're just trying to, there's no way you're taking in enough calories that you're burning. Because again, like I said, you're doing 10 miles a day. It's pretty wild. So I say all that to say this, right? 3 years later, I've never seen. So I've had a few encounters with elk out in the wild while hunting. Never either one close enough with my rifle, or I started bow hunting the year after that first year. Bow hunting is a totally different game, right? You're talking about having to get within 30, 40 yards of an animal that doesn't want you to get within 600 yards of them. So that is just wildly different. So again, I've had a few encounters. I could literally count on both hands, the number of elk I've seen hunting over the last 3 years until this last Monday. I'm pretty sure it was like 8 elk that I've seen outside of like Rocky Mountain National Park or one of these other major protected parks where elk roam freely and just walk up to you like it's nothing. So this Monday, we went out hunting, and we had a license in Wyoming. Colorado hunting is short and it's over. Usually you get a week for like rifle hunting. You get a full month for bow hunting. That's how hard it is, that they're actually willing to give you a month to go try to kill an elk with a bow. Just to give those listeners out there success rates, with a bow, it's a 14% success rate. So it's 14% chances of you actually getting an elk with a bow in Colorado. With a rifle, it shoots up 24%. So it's still not even that high. But yeah, it's still a really hard animal to hunt. So we had tags in Colorado, and we had a tag in Wyoming. And we had this late season tag that went through the end of January. So this was really our last hunting experience. And we knew that this tag was more for winter. So going earlier, like you can go, but the chance of seeing something is slim, right? So we're following the weather. We're hoping the elk migrate from cooler temps down the mountain to the slower elevation. So we've been there before. we've been to this spot before, and there was nothing. There was no sign, right? So we're looking for, we're looking for scat. We're looking for prints. We're looking for anything, bedding. They're huge animals, so you can tell when they've been places. And we went this week, and we had this plan of, all right, we're gonna go and we're gonna hike 2.5 miles in, because that's where we've seen sign, right? We're gonna go this far in, knowing that like everything in between, there's no elk there. There was no sign in between there, so we're just gonna go right to the back. And we're going to do it in the dark, right? So we're going to do it in the dark because you're not allowed to hunt in the dark. So you get to hunt during light. Mm-hmm. So we start walking, and we get about 600 yards from the truck, and all of a sudden we hear a stampede, a literal stampede. Yeah, and I'm talking like Lion King stampede. Like I have no clue where, right? It's pitch black. I have no clue. Me and my buddy, we have no clue which way the stampede is coming. It was the loudest thing I've ever heard. At first, I've never heard one in person. So I'm like, what the hell is that? I'm like, it sounds like a train almost. And it just kept going. It went on for probably a minute plus. And we finally realized and figured out that that's a stampede of elk. That's a huge herd of elk that we spooked and is now running scared of us. Hmm. And we begin to have this conversation about what our new plan is, because now we have this stampede of elk running right past us 600 yards from the truck versus going 2.5 miles in. And we decide to, it's me and my buddy, and we decide to just sit down. We literally put on every article of clothing we had, all of our down. We sat down right where we stood, and we just waited for sunlight, waited for sunrise to come, and just to see what was going on around us. So sunrises, we walk a little bit towards where we heard the stampede running to, and boom, there they are. There's 100 elk, and they're probably like 800 yards from us at this point. And we are so excited. We're like little children because, right, we're acting like a child, right? We're little children because we've never seen, my buddy too. My buddy's been hunting elk for 3 years as well. And we have never seen this many elk in one spot. And where we're hunting was, a lot of Wyoming is really open, very different than Colorado elk hunting. So we're like, oh my God, this is amazing. So we close the distance. We close the distance to about 230 yards. And I'm really nervous. I'm like, I don't want to blow it. And so I tell my buddy, all right, you shoot first. He keeps telling me that I should shoot first. And I'm like, no. It's like an argument. And this trend continues as the story goes on. He and I, and there's like never any ill or malicious intent between the two of us. We literally like bicker like an old married couple or something. And I'm like, no, you shoot. And he's telling me like, no, you're going to shoot. And finally I'm like, I'm not shooting. I'm too nervous. I don't want to blow the opportunity for you. Like, you're just going to shoot. So finally he does. And he takes an elk down. They run. I had a few opportunities at this point to potentially shoot again. And I screwed him up, as I probably like it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm like, see, I told you I didn't want to shoot first, so I'm glad you got your elk. So we began to chase these elk. His elk was down, and it's winter in Wyoming, so I think it was like 15 degrees outside. So we left the elk. We're like, all right, we're just going to leave that elk, and we're going to chase the elk for me, trying to get me an elk as well. So we chased the elk for probably a good 2 miles, and just trying to get close enough to them, trying to get a shot. And we end up pushing them onto private land, and it just never happens. So at this point, we start walking back towards his elk, and we see this hill, and we're like, let's just go up to the hill. We're going to glass for more elk real quick, see if we see anything. So we get up there, and instantly my buddy's like, there's 8 elk 1.5 miles that way, opposite direction of where we need to go. And at this point, we've dropped our packs with his other elk. We don't have water. We don't have anything. Like we were literally trying to chase elk and make it happen. So now we decide, okay, even though we don't have anything, we're going after these 8 elk. And which is, probably a dumb move in hindsight. But we did it anyway. We were willing to take the risk. So we start chasing after these elk. And we close the distance fairly quick, and we get to the point where we're about to crest over the hill where we know they are, and boom, there's another hunter sitting right at the top of this rock pile, and he spooked the elk already. They're off in the distance running, like full speed running. So I was a little annoyed. It's public land. There's nothing that you can do. It happens. You run into other hunters. But yeah, I was a little annoyed because we chased them over 1.5 miles away. So we go back and we process we process his elk in the field. So what many people may not know, once you kill a wild animal, specifically a huge animal like an elk, you have to process it in the field, meaning you have to get all 4 quarters off, so all 4 of its legs. You have to get the back straps and then the tenderloins by law. And we'll get into conservation and legal stuff, I hope, in this conversation down the road. But by law, you have to take those things, all 4 quarters, back straps, and tenderloins. So you have to do this all in the field with like a pocket knife. And so we make that happen. And then to get it to the truck, you have to carry it in your bag. You have to open up your backpack and throw it in your bag. And you're talking about this leg, right? You're carrying 1 leg at a time on an elk, and you're talking probably like 75, 80 pounds. Just throw in your backpack and walk in however far. So if you take example, when we first started, we were going 2.5 miles. We would have to hike out 2.5 miles with that elk leg, right? Total of 4 times, right? To get all 4 legs out and all the other stuff. So you're talking about quite the distance. Thankfully, where we got these elk, we were 900 yards from the truck, which is absurd. It is so absurd, Bree. Oh my God. Like I have hiked, I'm telling you, when we went bow hunting this year for 8 days, and we hiked 10 miles a day.
Yeah.
And we saw like 2 elk the whole time. And in 600 yards from the truck, we see hundreds of elk. So it was just such a wild experience. So we get everything back to the truck. We eat lunch. And at this point, we make the decision. We're like, okay, we think, we chase those elk off of public onto private. Mm-hmm. We fired a rifle right? They know the sound of a rifle. They know what that means. All right. They know it's time to, get moving. And usually the air clears out.
So do the grizzlies.
Yeah, right.
Not by me.
Right.
I know the sound of that.
So we decide to go to this other area. It's still part of the unit, but there's a bunch of private land in between. So you had to like get in your car, drive outside, go around to get to this other little section of the unit. And we're now about 6-7 miles total from where we chased the elk to, right? Off of the public onto the private. So we're sitting on this hill, and my buddy is amazing. He grew up in the Midwest, Wisconsin, and he's an amazing hunter, first off, and then he's an amazing spotter. So like he can see stuff with the naked eye, and then like you give him a pair of binoculars, and he's just like incredible. We have tons of conversations like, oh, do you see that elk or that deer? It's right there. It's all right. Go here and look at this mountain with this rock pile and this tree. And I'm like, I still don't see it, Jeff. So he gets very frustrated with me because I grew up in New York City. So show me, like, I'll point out where like a taxi cab is. But yeah, not animals. So, we're sitting on this hill, we're looking out into this new area, and my buddy's like, I think there's some elk out in this field way out. And he explains to me right where it is. And I look and I'm like, yeah, those are elk. Come to find out, we figured it out It's where we chased the original elk to. They were back on public land, and he spotted them at 5.5 miles away. I don't know how this guy, like, I'm telling you, he's incredible. Like, 5.5 miles away, he spots elk. And, after all of the events of the day, I'm tired, right? I'm exhausted. Elk hunting is hard. Even when it's 900 yards from the vehicle, elk hunting is hard. And I'm just like, we'll just sit here. We'll see if anything comes. And he's like, no, we know there's elk over there. We're going to go back over there. And he finally convinces me to do that. And it's getting close to end of day, last light. So we go, we jump in my truck real quick. I jump across a median, right? There's no place to turn around on this like highway. So I literally jump across a median to go the direction we want to go. We haul ass to back to the area where we were, and we start walking this area, same place we heard the stampede. And we're walking, and I'm like, all right, well, let's just stay here, because if they're on private, we need to give them space to walk onto public. And I was totally wrong. He'll love hearing that. I was totally wrong in thinking that. He was like, no, we just got to go forward and just see if they're already on public, just in front of us, the area that we can't see. And we start walking, and then bam, there's 6 of them. There's 6. They see us immediately. They start running. They're about 600 yards away. And I tried setting up for a shot, and it just wasn't happening. So we start chasing these 6, and I look over to my right, and I see the herd that he found at 5.5 miles away, and there's probably 400 elk there. Unbelievable. Like, we're talking Rocky Mountain National Park level elk, sitting, potentially on public, potentially on private land. And I look and I see some that are a little bit closer, and I'm like, Jeff, hey, I think those elk are on public. And he looks real quick and he turns back. He's like, those aren't on public. We're chasing these 6. And again, right back to the banter like a married couple. And I'm like, all right, whatever. Like, he knows what he's doing. So we're just going to run after these 6 that are already running away from us. And he finally looks over there and sees, he's like, oh, wait, what about those that are right there? I'm like, yeah, that's what I was talking about. I'm pretty sure those are on public land. So we run that way. They have no clue we're here, right? And now we're probably looking at this herd of like 400 plus, but there's probably a big group, like 30 to 60 elk that are closer and potentially on public land. So we get to like 750 yards. Light is diminishing quick, and we're at like 750 yards, and we're like, shit, I'm not taking a 750 yard shot. And it's really open. How are we going to figure this out? So we devise a game plan. We back up a little bit. We're running at this point. I think it's important to mention that I have to pee now at this point. Right. It's not necessarily an important part of the story, but it's a funny part of the story because, right, we're in the wide open, and I'm like telling my buddy, right, it's just that bickering back and forth. I'm like telling him, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to shoot if I have to pee. If my bladder hurts and like, I got to pee. He's like, fine, just don't stand up. So I have to figure out how to pee like in the wide open without standing up. And yeah, I'm not going to go into details, but I figured it out. I made it happen. And so we back up, we close the distance about 200 yards. We get to about 500 yards, 510, 520 yards. And this is really where my buddy is hilarious. He starts having a conversation with himself. He's talking to me, but he's just talking and he's talking to himself, and he's just like, oh, 500 yards, that's a long shot. I wouldn't take that. Are you going to take that? Oh man, 500 yards. You know what? I'd probably take that. Oh, wow, that's a long shot. What are you going to do? And at this point, like, he's just rambling. He's just talking, spewing nonsense, right? I don't know if he thinks he's trying to be helpful, what. And at this point, he's still talking, and I put my rifle down, and I know 500 yards is a really long shot, right? My friend actually texted me she said that's over a quarter of a mile, which is pretty crazy when you think of it that way. So at this point, I set my rifle down, and I do what I do, and I go to my breath, and I start going through a breathing exercise. And my buddy is probably thinking, like, you fucking hippie. like there's no time for breathing. But the elk don't know we're there. So I just start breathing. I'm not even touching my rifle. I don't want to be touching my rifle, right? The whole point is to get away from that and just come back to myself, right? Come back to what I know. And, right, I start overriding my fight or flight. I start breathing, and then I start to feel comfortable, and I start moving back towards my rifle. And, he sees me moving towards my rifle. He doesn't have hearing protection in yet. And he's just like, oh my God, are you going to shoot? And again, he doesn't give me time to answer. He's just like, he just keeps going. You're at like 520 yards. That's a really far shot. You're going to shoot? And I start getting my rifle. I start adjusting my scope, right? Like there's a shot protocol that if you're practicing with your rifle, you're practicing with any weapon, right? You go through those shot protocols. So I start going through that, and I adjust my scope. I pick a target, and he's like, which one are you looking at? And I'm like, okay, I described to him like this one. And I'm like, oh, but she's not offering me a shot. He's like, there's shots everywhere. And I'm like, don't make me switch. We're literally like yelling at each other, bickering back and forth. And I'm like, don't make me switch. And then I look over and I see this other one that looks better. And I'm like, oh, I think I want that one. So I switch. And now he's watching the one I originally pointed out. Now I'm on a different one. And he's like, are you still looking at that one? That one has a perfect shot. I'm like, no, I'm looking at these two that are stacked now. And he's like, okay, all right, I'm on them. And he's like, are you going to shoot? And now he keeps asking me, are you going to shoot? And I'm like, Jeff, I don't know. Like, I didn't know, right? Like, I didn't know if I was going to shoot or not.
You're like, I'm breathing.
Really. That was it. I'm like, I'm breathing. That's all I'm doing. I'm breathing, and I'm going through my shot protocol just to see how I feel. And I get to the point, and I take my safety off, and my finger isn't on the trigger yet, and I'm just looking down my scope, right? Just right in the crosshairs, feeling really comfortable. I'm feeling really relaxed. And I just said out loud, you shot an antelope at 300 yards. And all I was saying was just for confidence for me. Mm-hmm. I wasn't saying that to Jeff, right? So antelope are really small, and to shoot an antelope at 300 yards is a really far shot on a really small animal. So it was just purely for my confidence. And I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to... I shot an antelope at 300 yards. Like, I could do this, right? Elk are huge. They're like massive refrigerators out there at 500 yards. It's ridiculous how crazy they are. And so I said that, and I moved my finger down to the trigger, and I see the elk. She does this thing where she just like bends into her front legs a little bit. She dips down a little bit, and then she pops back up. And as soon as she pops back up, my crosshairs were dead center. I squeezed the trigger, dropped her at 500 yards, 520 yards. And at this point, I knew it was a good shot. I knew, like, I didn't see her go down. My buddy's like, she's down. I literally throw my rifle, totally unsafe. But I literally throw my rifle. I'm like, woo, yeah. I start celebrating. I am so freaking excited. My buddy's like, she's down, but she's not dead. And that's typical. Right. Usually you need to, right. There's usually a follow-up shot, oftentimes in hunting. So, I'm like, oh shit. I grab my rifle. I look at her. I see what's going on. I analyze the situation. I get up and I start running, and I'm like, I'm going to her. Right. I'm like, we have all of our shit. I took my binocular case off. Like, I set up shop. Like, I was meditating. I'm breathing. I'm not worried about hunting. My phone's out. Shit's all scattered across the land. It's about to be dark. And I just grab my rifle and I start running. And I'm like, I'm going to close the distance, get really close, and just finish her off. I start running 45 degrees in the opposite direction of the elk. I thought I was looking at the elk, and I was not. And I'm running. My buddy grabs everything. And he looks up. He's like, "Where the fuck are you going?" And I look and I'm like, "What are you talking about? The elk's over here." And I'm like looking. I'm like, "Oh, that's not the elk." And I was clearly running not towards my elk. So I end up running towards the elk and finishing her off. And oh my God, it was so amazing. It was so spectacular. And it was so, and I want to address the issue, right? It's not amazing that I took a life. It's part of the process, right? It's amazing that I've worked for 3 years. I've never seen more than a handful of elk until this day. And we were able to finally close the deal, finally make it happen. And yeah, it was amazing. It was so amazing. And yeah, I'm totally long-winded with this story, but it all started with a stampede, and I feel like I had to share the whole story, and now we're here, and I am freaking stoked.
How long did it take to process and get everything back to the car, the truck?
So that's what's really funny is the area that we were in, we were allowed to actually drive on some of the dirt roads, the paths. If you're getting wild game out, you're allowed to drive these dirt roads. You're not allowed to drive them to hunt them, but once you have an animal down, you can actually drive them to hunt them. So my pack out was throwing them in the back of my truck.
Oh.
It was incredible. I totally right. So we talked to our buddy afterwards, and he was like, you've earned that. He's like, 3 years of everything that you've done. He's like, you earned getting to throw it into the back of the truck.
Nice.
And but it took us an hour and a half to field process, right? Get the quarters off, same thing, back straps, tenderloins in the dark. Headlamps. I have some photos I've posted already, but it was incredible. It was freezing cold, and I had a smile from ear to ear. It just covered in blood, trying to process this animal in the field, and it was amazing. It was such an incredible experience. It was an incredible experience to share with my friend who was also like in the same boat as me. We'd never gotten an elk, and we were able to do it in one day. So like 2 elk in one day, you tell that to anyone, that's absurd. So yeah, it's really cool. And out of it, and just to go into like a little further detail, since we're talking about food and our relationship with it, is that isn't the end of it, right? Like now it's in my truck, and now we get to drive home. But then the next day we wake up and everything's hurting, for both me and my buddy, and we have to process it, right? So you can turn it into like a processor where you pay someone to cut it up and grind meat and make steaks and do all that sorts of thing. But that's not how we roll. That's not how we do it. One, I'm not going to pay you to do something that I could do myself. And two, if you think about this, like how many people touch your meat when you buy it from the grocery store? You don't know that. You don't know how many people, how many hands that meat, chicken, beef, pork, whatever it is that you bought have been through. And there's something to be said about that, I think. Whereas, it goes back to your point about the chickens. Like, what they're eating. With this elk, I know who touched it. Me and my friend. And that's it. It's not processed through machines that aren't clean. It's not, I know I'm getting my animal versus, if I send it to a processor, am I getting my animal? Most likely, but, is it touching contaminated equipment? You have no clue. So we bring it back, and then that took us another 8 hours in my kitchen, breaking down these legs, cutting them up, grinding the meat, getting them ready for freezing. Freezing them is, you don't want the meat to spoil. So air packing, I vacuum seal my meat and throw it in the freezer, and yeah, now it's good to go. We had steak, elk steak for lunch while we were processing, and it is incredible meat. So yeah, that's where we're at. And I've been on cloud 9 since.
Yes. It's actually the healthiest meat you can eat.
Yeah.
Wild game is elk on a lot of different levels. So,
yeah, explain. Yeah, let's hear it. I want to know. Like, tell us why.
Why?
Yeah, tell us why. Why is it
Well, I don't
healthy?
know all the details,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
well, first of all, think about what it's eating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just in the basic
Mm-hmm.
sense. It's all natural, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's eating what it's supposed to be eating, what it's always ate.
Right.
But from the perspective, my dad does a lot of research with, in terms of heart health and specifically sodium to potassium or potassium to sodium ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of that, it's like one of the healthiest, it has the healthiest like cell essentially
Mm-hmm.
for meat. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I
Yeah.
said that, but I don't know
Yeah.
the details. I'm literally regurgitating things that of other people that I've heard.
For sure, for sure. And you're right. Like you're right. There is so much, right? Like again, what it's eating, right? It's
And it's
wild.
lean meat. Like the other part is, typically,
Mm-hmm.
if you think about cows, a lot of like feedlot cows are going to be very high in fat. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
the other part is wild game is a leaner meat than you would
Yeah.
get from something you get at the grocery store.
Right.
And
They're not treated with antibiotics.
And they're much so like animals that are, and that's why even if you think about like grass finished cattle or cows, and they're usually, I know in Wyoming, they move between the mountains and then in the winter they kind of herd them all back down to the lowlands. And so musculature, and that's, if you think about wild game, their musculature is, much more like dense and there than a feedlot cow. So
Absolutely.
I guess those would be like the parts that I do know about why it's the healthiest meat.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And I think, and it's funny, Joe Rogan mentions this on his podcast. He talks a lot about elk hunting, but there's something to be said about like eating an animal that's surviving, right, for their life, that's running for their life from predators. Wild game, they're out there trying to survive. They have testosterone running through their muscles. Their their what the things that you're eating of this animal. Sorry, my dog just joined and wants to say hi. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is definitely the healthier options for meat than farmed animals, farmed seafood, farmed fish. So I think you're so right.
Yeah. So just like composition and then also the nature of it. I think I actually am very curious about this component, but there are people who like energetically, right? What's getting passed along. So like a life of an animal that has like been traumatized essentially. So like if you're smashed into close quarters, you're not having a good quality of life as an animal, and what is being absorbed into like cells in that way. If you think about humans, our body holds trauma, so why would that be any different in an animal? And I know that there was a woman who, actually I think it was, I feel like I learned about this because they were talking about, I was listening to something along the lines of like learning disorders, and it might have been a woman who was autistic who designed a way to slaughter cattle that is not as like traumatizing.
Traumatic.
So like,
Interesting.
yeah, it was like the way that I don't know, just the way that they were previously being processed. She like found this new way, and it like affected actually like the way that the meat came out or tasted or whatnot. But I also wonder about that with hunting, because the animal typically might know that they're I mean, I guess if you get it on the first shot, you're hoping they're like chill, and so they're not. But I do wonder about how dying that way would impact the meat.
Yeah, I think it does, and there is proof, right? They say that one female meat is better tasting than male meat. One, because of testosterone levels, but two, when you do hunt them, right, and that is a traumatic experience for them if they're aware, right, and bow hunting more so, right, because there's no chance of like instant death with bow hunting. Right, with bow hunting they have to bleed out. With rifle hunting, it's shock, right? So it's a bullet moving at however fast, 2,800 feet per second, something like that. Right, that they die pretty quickly in a lot of cases. But the testosterone levels spike. And when there's testosterone levels running through the muscle, they say that affects the taste of the meat. So there's something to it for sure. So they say like eating female, any animal female is sweeter than eating the male of the animal. And then, right, like this might trigger some people, but like eating like the young, like like eating a calf, you can absolutely hunt calf, elk, or even, baby or young deer or anything like that. And that is also better tasting meat than years of testosterone running through the body and being chased by predators, bears, wolves, that type of thing, man. So that does affect the meat.
Interesting. Thanks. Yeah. I always kind of wondered about that.
So tell me about, like, I did a lot of talking initially. I want to hear like your thoughts on, when we first started talking about potentially doing this and talking about food, you had brought up, a lot of the reason people go vegan or vegetarian is because of a lot of things that you just said, right? There's like this traumatic experience for the animal, and some places they're cooped up, and it's very trauma involved, so people I don't want to do that to the animal. But talk to us about like you mentioned being like a shaman in the first episode, I think it was, and their thoughts on plants and spirits. So talk about that, and then maybe we can even talk about conservation and hunting animals, and how killing an animal wild isn't much different or isn't terrible for the animal.
I think even just say, like, I was vegetarian for 7 years, and when I was vegetarian, I was in 6th grade all through junior high and high school, and vegan for 6 months in there. And I actually started, or was a member, or started a club called SAVE, and it was Students Against Vivisection and Exploitation. And it was a lot of just about the way that our now there's tons of films about it, and I actually haven't seen many of them, but about it's feedlot kind of meat. It's a lot of just what you get from the grocery store, and unfortunately at this point, organic, I think, is very much a buzzword in terms of regulations. It's a little convoluted, and my own relationship with food has moved into, I think local is the best that you can do for yourself. If you have the ability to go to a farm and see, or go to a ranch and see the process, that what's happening with your food, what they're being fed, what they're being fed, and then you're eating because it's going through them. And
local's huge. There's a lot to be said about local,
and that goes into environmental aspects, right? Just in terms of the impact it takes to get your food to you, what needs to happen to the food so that it's preserved, so it stays good in that traveling to getting to you. But why, I guess the last few years, my perspective around Again, vegetarian, this was ages ago. So I've eaten meat for a while since then. But the argument, about eating a living, or taking the life of a living being in terms of people who eat meat, my spiritual perspective is that there's souls and there is life in everything, right? And so for me, taking the life of an animal is no different from taking the life of a plant. They all have spirits, they all have souls. And again, you eat what you want.
You sound a lot like a hippie right now.
I know. But that's where, there's a lot of people who won't take the life of an animal, but they actually don't care what the life of their plant that they're eating lived.
Yep.
What is going into, and unless you go to the farm and get to see how it is being raised, I mean, it can be no different than a feedlot. Your vegetables from the store can be no different from a feedlot, and you're actually planting it to raise it to kill it.
Yeah.
And it is the same process.
Yep.
It's just one we've personified, animals we've personified, so we have this emotional attachment, where we haven't personified plants. And a lot of indigenous tribes, when the white man came in and settled, they were disgusted by cutting into Mother Earth, just the idea of farming, right? Of farming these crops, because they were foraging. Before the white man came, they weren't digging into the earth to plant things and grow it.
Yep.
They were taking from the land, but in communion with the land. And that's also the part of hunting, is historically we have hunted.
Yeah.
We've eaten meat. I mean, our teeth are made to eat meat, right? And I'm not saying we can't evolve, but
man has always been part of the equation. And I think that's something important to talk about, right now, what you're talking about, and something to talk about when we move towards a talk around conservation. Man has always been part of the equation. They have never not been, right? Man has always been predator.
And that's, and there is, I guess my approach or relationship food has moved more towards exactly that, my relationship with it. And so how, if I don't know where my food is specifically coming from, what it's been through, I'm going to offer love to it. I am actually going to give thanks for every single thing that I consume, and knowing that it is one part of the entire ecosystem. Humans are part of the ecosystem. And so if we're eating meat, that's something we've done it's just regulated, say, populations. It's helped us survive. I've made this comment before, but not on here, that vegetarianism could be considered a privilege.
Yeah.
Because and I want to put aside an asterisk to that, because there are spiritual beliefs that don't believe in eating meat, and I'm not saying disregard that. There's definitely cultures where it is not part of their belief system, and I totally respect that. However, there's say in the United States, before we inhabited, white people came in and colonized, you wouldn't, if there was a buffalo that they killed, you wouldn't be no, I'm not going to eat that. It's part of survival.
Right.
And so I think that's something to really consider, is the privilege of being vegetarian.
Yeah, I agree.
It's 100%. A
100%.
privileged choice. And there's also a lot of countries who still don't have the privileges that we have in our Western world. And if you were to say, I'm going to pass up some meat, it's offensive.
Yeah. Excuse me? What?
Like I'm reading another shaman book about an African shaman, and it was there was a part of that was like, oh, we got meat, and it's like, you eat that chicken, like you are eating it. It's not like I'm gonna skip out on the meat, and so that's like a little bit of my kind of, again, having been in a place of like, when I was vegetarian, it was like killing animals. I was like I had 100 animals. My parents, thank you. And that was definitely part of it. And then the treatment of them, the process before, them making it onto the table. But like being an athlete, it was really hard to get the fuel that I needed. And at a certain point, and also just lifestyle, like I was young and it was hard to go to a friend's house and be like, oh no, I'm not going to eat what your mom made,
Right.
And so once I actually went to college, I started eating meat again. And then I dove more into like, what is that relationship? How does it look now? And the reasons why I currently eat meat is because I feel better. It sustains me better. Whatever is inside of me, like, thrives with it.
Yep.
And a more meat heavy diet. I also understand that people in the olden days would go periods without having meat, and so yes, you wouldn't pass it up, but you also, hey, maybe you went a couple weeks where you didn't get a kill. So
yeah,
but it's also the communion with the earth in general. And so just being as connected to my food sources as possible when I can, and then pouring love into the food that I don't know where it's coming from.
Right.
And just because we are consuming whatever energy it was in the process of it getting to your plate or to your kitchen. Gosh, I don't know how coherent that was. I feel like I went on a lot of tangents.
There's so much. It was absolutely coherent, but there's so much to digest. Pun intended, I guess. There's so much to digest there. You talked about a lot, and you talked about culture, the ecosystem, and I have so many thoughts around that. I'm trying to gather my thoughts so I don't sound like I'm running on tangents. First, like the ecosystem, having, the farmers are actually starting to realize how important like wild animals are. So for a lot of people that might not know, buffalo used to roam freely in the United States before we killed them all.
Technically called bison.
Bison.
This is a little lesson. Bison in North America.
North America.
Because buffalo is only Africa, water buffalo. Same with, we call it antelope, but it's technically the pronghorn.
Pronghorn, right? We don't have antelope here. We don't have antelope. We don't have buffalo.
But that's what we refer to them. But it's cool.
Yeah.
I always find that interesting,
For sure. So farmers are starting to realize how, how important animals are and moving the animals across the land. There's actually a documentary that I totally spaced on the name right now, a documentary that just came out talking about this farmer starting to realize how important it is to have cattle graze through the land, to put nutrients back into the soil so that they can actually grow different crops instead of monocropping, which if you don't know what monocropping is, it's just growing the same crop over and over, which we do a lot in the Midwest with either soy or corn. Corn is the number one crop that we produce. That's why we have corn syrup in everything, hence sugar. So,
and I think there was like subsidies to grow corn. Like this is where like the government subsidizing thing isn't always a good thing, because they subsidized. Was it corn or potato?
It was corn.
Okay, corn. Yeah, so they subsidized corn, and so now we have this problem of an overproduction of corn, which is now corn goes into everything. It makes some of the plastic even on your packaging.
Right. Yeah, and so monocropping is growing just one crop over and over and over again, and what a lot of people don't realize is that to grow a crop, to grow something, right? Like you said, like what's in the ground, what's being pulled up out of the ground, what is that growing from? And when you monocrop, it takes nutrients. So those same nutrients are being pulled from the earth, and then just you leave the earth bare, right? So you deprive the earth from all of those nutrients, where you can put the nutrients back into the earth by allowing cattle to graze and eat, and then poop or all over, fertilize the land, right? It gets put back into land, nutrients come back, and that's why it's also good to put different crops through lands. A lot of farmers see the point of doing one crop one year or another crop another.
Yeah, crop rotation is like incredibly important for to prevent soil degradation.
Yeah. And so instead of using fertilizers, these farmers are starting to realize, this one farmer says he likes to sign, or there's two places to sign the check. He likes signing the back. And when you have to buy fertilizers, you have to take care of your land. You're usually signing the front of the check, right? Which means you're spending money. Whereas if you get animals and you're constantly grazing the land and switching where you're growing your crops, you don't need to have the fertilizers, right? You're keeping the nutrients in the soil, and you're doing what used to happen when these millions of bison roamed freely. Mm-hmm. So really interesting concept that bringing how people think that killing cows in these mass farms is with the methane is bad for the environment. You have these other documentaries saying how terrible greenhouse gases are because of how much meat people eat. And the other thing that isn't addressed is when there's carbon in the earth. Mm-hmm. And so when you're digging up soil, when you're digging up plants, whether to plant or to harvest, you're releasing carbon into the atmosphere, which is another huge aspect of the pollution and things like that, and that isn't addressed often.
Yeah, and if you want to read more about it, regenerative farming is the site. And what's another significant part about that is they talk about needing the land to allow that kind of free range idea of cattle. However, there are people, I know there's a guy on the East Coast who does regenerative farming, and he said the same amount of land you would have to produce the feed for a feedlot cattle, you could open that up and have that grazing, and versus here's my massive plot to create the grain and the feed for all of these cows just shoved into this one area. And so that same thing of the recycling of carbon and everything by allowing cattle to graze and have that system of crop rotation. And
this is why we're friends, because one, we haven't talked about this, and two, you knew exactly what I was talking about. Thank you for putting a name to it, regenerative farming, and the documentary is Kiss the Ground.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, it's on Netflix, and that's exactly what it is. It talks about regenerative farming. And how important it is to these farmers, and taking up, right, you're using all this space to grow one crop to feed this, when you can just use that to actually feed the animals.
But the government.
Right. Oh. But the government.
Gosh. I saw a meme or something recently, and it was above was regenerative farming. It was cattle, and they're you say this is bad, and it was just kind of a group of cattle, but this is okay. And it was these, probably a soy farm, just massive monocrop farm.
Right.
It's do you know Bill Gates now is the biggest owner of farmland?
Seriously?
Yep.
That's crazy.
We won't go
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yep.
Yeah, so the other thing that you brought up, and you brought up local, and the one thing you didn't touch on with local is farming and beef and chicken and all that also has a lot to do with, eating local, just like bees. So we hear it often with bees and pollen. So like if you have allergies, sometimes doctors or, people tell you, hey, you should probably eat honey from the area that you live in, local raw honey. Because what it does is it's like a vaccine almost, right? I don't understand the science behind it. I'm not a doctor, right? Please don't rip my head off, people listening, about my ignorance to this. But you consume honey from local areas because what you're ingesting is the pollen and the things that the bees make honey with to help your body get used to those things that are in the air. And the same thing applies with eating meat, right? Like we live in a dry area. Eating cattle that are raised in, in more humid areas, right? They're eating different things. It has an impact on the body, right? What they're consuming is what you're consuming. So, eating local, I think, has a big impact for everything.
Mm-hmm. One thing I do want to touch on just really quickly, and it's more of like an informative comment, is, and just because you're saying where our food eats, recently, Colorado, you're in a good place because they've now required meat to be labeled as grass finished.
Yep.
And this comes back to those buzzwords, right? That's why I've organic is not significant to me anymore. Nope. Like local is the only thing that can guarantee you that I have a grasp of what's going on with my food.
Yep.
And I will tell you, I don't eat all local. I want to, and I'm working towards that, even myself being able to produce it. But I do my best where I can.
Where are Oreos grown? Because I need to get those locally.
I bet you can make some. But you'll get grass-fed beef, and all it means is at some point in its life, it ate grass.
Yep.
So grass finished is going to be the meat that has eaten grass, has not been grain-fed. It's the duration of its life.
Right.
Because they'll let them roam, and then they'll plump them up right before they
right. To that point, cattle, they're required to be grass fed for this first 6 months of their life. So as the mother gives birth to cows, the mother's out there in the field eating grass with their calves. And then, yeah, you're absolutely right. So that's grass fed. But then they're moved inside and they're fed grain. So, grass finished, you make a valid point. Yeah.
So grass finished. And I know, again, Colorado now it's like a law, I believe, or it's required for it to be labeled. They can't say grass. I can't remember the specifics, but it's designated. So well, that's where just actually to stem off that is just understanding and being mindful about how you're eating or what you're eating or what you're buying. And we can get really stuck into just believing what we read or what we're told. And that's, hey, if that's how you want to treat your body, go for it. Right. Yep. But if you don't feel good, if you're getting sick, you might want to consider starting to think a little more about that.
Yeah. Gosh, that brings up so many things for me. And I want to make sure I talk about, you brought up cultural, so I want to talk about that too, especially in the yoga world with the ahimsa and that. But I want to touch on this, right? So you mentioned if you want to keep doing that, right? You're feeling bad. So I grew up, right? I grew up low class, right? We were poor, right? We grew up in New York City and, right. I'm sorry. I don't know how to say it. So with, right. I think knowledge is important, but with lower class, I we talked about this briefly in text, talking about access to foods. And I don't know that it's necessarily about having specific access to foods. I think there's a knowledge gap that's a problem for people eating garbage, eating stuff that they probably shouldn't be eating that's making them feel bad. I think that they don't know that, right? We're so quick, especially with westernized medicine, that, right, we eat so much processed food, right? You go to the grocery store and 90% of the grocery store outside, right, they say, right, you should only be shopping the outside, right? The stuff in the fridges and freezers, the fresh stuff. But the rest of the store, everything in the aisles is processed. There's chemicals, there's things that keep them from going bad. Mm-hmm. Right? These things don't have microbes in them. And I think that's a huge impact into, especially poor, lower income people. They go towards these processed foods because they taste good. They're loaded with sugar. But I don't know.
And they're easy and quick. That's a good, important thing. When, again, my friend said, if you're working 3 jobs, how do you have the time to cook?
Right.
Good food, healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. But so like I'd say there's a knowledge gap, but it's also like you don't know, right? You have to break the mold almost of, right? Because the way I grew up is eating, like I always remember like we ate, most of our vegetables were out of a can. They're still vegetables, but they're not fresh. They're not from the produce section, right? They've already been, put in salt and, preserved, whatever that is. But breaking that mold, you have to, I don't know what you need to break the mold. I still eat, processed food, probably not, I continue to try to strive to eat less of it and more natural, right? I try to eat, like I eat meat. I do eat meat almost every meal. And I really try to stay away from the processed food, but it's so hard because it's easy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say is, I guess I'm just trying to say that, right, we have this problem in America with obesity, right? And obesity leads to heart disease and diabetes and all these other, right, things, massive issues that are destroying the American public. But we don't have the knowledge, and I'm not saying anyone's stupid, right? There's a big difference, right? I'm not calling anyone stupid because I was there, and there's a lot of people there that, we just continue to eat processed foods. And we need to make that switch and see the impact that it has. And the other thing is, especially with like obesity, if you've been eating processed foods, you've been eating sugar-laden foods, and it took you 20 years to become obese, right? Switching to whole foods, local foods, that type of thing, and expecting to see a change in a month is unrealistic, right? It took you 20 years to get there. Well, what makes you think it's not going to take 20 years to fix, right, the problem? So knowing that it's more of a long-term solution, right? That's been the thing in my relationship with food. Again, right, I'm going back. Everything that I'm saying is all based off of my relationship that I've had. Is that over time I've made small adjustments. Mm-hmm. And, my wife, I love my wife to death. I give her so much credit to keeping me alive because she makes me eat vegetables. And, she's introduced me to so many things and just eating less salt and, eating less processed foods. But it's just taken time to understand that. And I would just say that I was a byproduct of how and where I grew up, mm-hmm. Where, growing up on wild game, that just didn't happen where I was from and where I grew up. And so now making that shift, again, that's been interesting to have that relationship with food. And now understanding, like I work out every day and, understanding that how important it is to feed your body whole foods and, you know, because I have the opportunity to be obese just like anyone. And for me, it's a conscious decision. But the other thing is, and I'll let you chime in here. Never, ever, ever, ever do I use exercise as punishment for what I ate. And I can't stress that enough for me, right? I think a lot of people do. Exercise is not punishment for anything that it should never be a punishment, period. But it should not be a punishment for what you eat. I still eat Oreos. I do. I'm not, like, I wasn't joking, like, where are Oreos grown? I know they're not grown. I love Oreos. Oreos and milk. Again, I still drink soda, and right, I have those things, and I know, right, you don't have to tell me sugar's bad. I know it's inflammatory. I know there's all sorts of issues. And it's just continuing to make those small changes. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, a couple of things that came up when you were talking. The first is around this idea of education and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
and the socioeconomic impact, right, of that income, time, capacity
Mm-hmm.
for healthier food. Unfortunately, like, fast food has been marketed as, right, this fast food, right? And at this point, it's not financially, it's not cheap.
No.
And so then the argument is time. And I think education is actually really the breaking point, because you can cook up rice and beans
Mm-hmm.
for the week.
Yeah.
And this comes back to food as privilege. Yeah. Even in the United States, even for those at a lower socioeconomic level. People don't want to eat rice and beans.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's food is no longer looked at as just like, let me survive off of food. It is, we are pleasure.
Gluttonous.
We're pleasure seekers.
Yeah, for sure.
So food is playing a different role than it has in the past.
Yeah.
You go to other country, you go to South Central America, certain areas, it's rice and beans.
Yep.
Okay. You go to Nepal, and it's dal balt for every meal.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is it healthy, it's local, right? Yep. But it's the same thing every day. And even personally, in my like own diet is pretty consistent day to day. Like, I actually don't change that much. It makes me, because I can spend a lot of time in a grocery store reading the back of packages, seeing where it's coming from, like Googling, what is this weird word? I don't know. I do tend to buy like the same things and eat the same things over and over again. And as pretty often Whole Foods, like it's not Whole Foods, the store. We don't have that in Cody.
Yeah. Actual Whole Foods, yes.
Potato or sweet potato, like kale, spinach, or Brussels sprout, like some type of green. I have eggs, and then meat.
Yeah.
And
it's funny.
I love to cook and I do fancy, but I don't in my daily. And it's because I enjoy what I eat, but I'm not eating to seek pleasure.
Yep. Yeah. When I eat to seek pleasure, I eat cannolis. And, right. That's just,
Oreos.
Oreos. Right. But you're so right. As soon as you started talking, I knew exactly where you were going. And I thought, my diet is so fucking boring. I eat the same thing every day. And like, if people were outside looking in, it's like literally I eat 4 eggs in the morning with some, with bread, right? It is processed, but, I do try to get whole grain, right? Not just white bread. But yeah, I eat 4 eggs. I eat meat throughout the day. Right. Different types of meat, whether it be beef, poultry, wild game, that type of thing. Rice, potatoes, and throw a few vegetables in there, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. And you mentioned time. Time is critical to eating, but there's also how are we wasting our time? This is a big one to me. Like we're so, our society, we have Netflix, we have Hulu, we have this. How many hours are we sitting on our asses binge watching TV, and then we say we don't have time to feed us, feed our families, feed our children. And that annoys me. Like, and clearly you could probably tell I'm getting passionate about that, but right, like why aren't we prepping? Like I prep, I do. Everything the way I have it frozen is frozen into meals for two, right? Because it's usually me and my wife, or even if it's just for me, I'll make it and then I have leftovers. But then if we have friends over, I know take out, okay, another package. So everything is pre-prepped and ready for me to, always make a meal. Now there's times I don't feel like eating. There's times I want pizza. And I do those things, but I know if I don't prep and I don't have, right, because my time, I do a lot. And, people say it to me often, like, holy shit, Alan, how much do you do? How do you, right? And I still find time to eat proper, to fuel my body. And, and I know fueling my body, what it requires and what's needed.
Mm-hmm. And I want to address the cost aspect of it as well. Mm-hmm. You're either spending the money now or you're spending it later. And
yep.
Because modern medicine has kept us alive, we no longer we're no longer as concerned with preventative measures, which is what am I putting in my body? What is causing my illness or disease? What am I putting in my body? Because we just have this quick fix of medication.
I'm just going to take this pill and I'm all better.
And I had actually on one of the retreats, a student there she's a doctor, and she had mentioned she had a patient. She's like, you need to eat, like, you got to eat salad. You got to eat, and he's like, it's too expensive. And she's like, you're going to pay for it in your medications. You're going to pay. And I look at that as time as well.
Yep.
So you don't have enough time to cook right now, but are you going to have enough time to miss work for the doctor's appointments because you haven't been consuming healthy food that's preventing you from having to go to the doctor?
When you have to have stents put in, when you have to have a bypass of your arteries because they're clogged.
And there's genetic, there is genetic predisposition that can cause things, but even more of a reason to do your part at the beginning. But we are a quick fix. We are a culture that is like no longer patient. And so I rather just have this instant gratification, even though the repercussions might make my life harder in the future.
Yeah. And to the genetic thing, I'm not discounting that genetics aren't real, right? Genetics are real, but I think we also fall back on that as an excuse too often. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, it's just genetics. No, it's you didn't get off the couch today, right? And I've seen it a lot in my family. Oh, it's genetics, and unfortunately, I have obesity in my family, and I sure genetics play a part, and I think body type plays a part, right? I think, right, there's ectomorphs, endomorphs, mesomorphs, right? So I think body type plays a part, and I could eat all sorts of sugar and stuff and I don't get fat, thankfully.
But it doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy inside.
No, right? 100.
So appearance is not a reflection of
the
health of your internal ecosystem.
Correct. To a degree, except when it comes to obesity, right? Like, right? There's and there's no body shaming or anything like that. I'm not trying to get into that, but obesity, science has proven that obesity puts more stress on joints, right? You get fat around your organs, and they have to work harder to operate. But for me, like, I work out every day. I try to eat right. I'm not saying, and I'm not perfect. I am no angel. Right. But for me, people are like, oh, you're just blessed with, great genetics, whatever. Like sometimes I have a six pack, right? And right now is not the time that I have a six pack, but like it's not. It's just the way I eat, and genetically in my family, like we are predisposed to being obese, and I think it's more so, right, like an excuse that we use because we don't want to work. And I saw this meme lately that, it's funny. It was saying like the opposite ends of the spectrum are hard, right? Dieting and eating right and working out is hard, but so is being obese and unhealthy. Choose your hard, right? So, and that applies to many things, right? Just being disciplined is hard, but doing whatever you want is going to end up result in being hard in a different way.
And I want to acknowledge something. I don't, okay, I got a couple here.
Yeah.
Last fall through winter, I gained about 15, 20 pounds. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, that was hard. Right. And so like, I, in my head, I have a weight where it's like, if I hit that weight, like that's like go time. Cause I just, my lifestyle's keeps me like I'm active. I just naturally eat healthy. I was living in my car. Yeah. I wasn't as active. Mm-hmm. I didn't have access to a kitchen to cook foods that I normally would eat. So I'd gained about 15, 20 pounds and I was on the journey of like getting back to certain routines, and it was hard. And it is hard. It is very, very hard because it takes time. And part of it was like, I guess this is part 2. Mm-hmm. Don't try to do it all at once. Yeah. And I will say food, what you eat makes a bigger difference than working out. I would start there. I would start with what you're putting, because I started working out, I was active, but I was still living in my car. And when I finally was in a kitchen, I was finally able to have a little more ownership over what I was eating, is when that changed. Same thing with drinking. College, I played water polo. You went hard at everything. So you went hard at your sport, but you went hard at drinking. I was I majored in water polo and drinking. And and even the New York lifestyle was very,
drinking.
Very drink. Okay.
Oh yeah. What do you do after work? You go drink.
Yes.
What do you do on the weekends? You go drink.
So many calories, right? Yeah. Like, and then with that comes like crappy food, making bad decisions. Like everything goes with that. Mm-hmm. When I moved to Colorado, I just like naturally started to lose weight because I wasn't drinking much at all. And my food had changed. And so even though, now I'm a very active human, I've always have been my whole life, the deal breaker was what I was consuming, what I was putting into my body. And so I would say anyone who is on this journey, first, don't try to do it all at once. Don't try to change your diet and start working out, okay? Establish good eating habits first, and then start implementing the workouts. Start adding that into it, because if you can't control your eating before you start working out, when you start burning calories, it's going to be a lot harder to control your eating. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean control in like deprivation. I'm just saying having that discipline around what you're putting in your body, making healthy choices, and then the patience. I
totally agree. There's a saying, you can't outwork a bad diet. Mm-hmm. And it's so true. And just going back to the ego part of abs, right? Like you can't work out for abs. Like you can do all the crunches you want, right? Abs are made in the kitchen, right? If you want this aesthetic look of abs, there's nothing, right? Like to have abs, it doesn't mean that you're healthy or you're fit or anything like that. It's just purely diet. You have to have some muscle around that, but 100%. Yeah. Change your diet first. And then I totally agree about right? That's like New Year's resolutions.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. It's like you're trying to do all these things at once, make these
I'm
huge
gonna
life changes.
go to the gym every day. No, you're not. You don't go to the gym every day now. And I work out every day, but it's not. I didn't start working out every day. And also when I miss a day, I give myself grace too. I miss days all the time. And I don't, again, it's not a punishment. I'm not, oh yeah, I missed a day. Guess what? Tomorrow I get to try again.
Yeah.
And you just have to know that, like, yeah, some days you're going to lose, and that's okay. And then you get to try again. And my goal is just to have more days where I ate mostly right and I worked out, and hopefully, things are going to continue on that path. And I just want to add more and more to it. I love that you brought that up.
One other thing that I think is, I think I lost point number 2 and 3. I know I got number 2. I'm trying to remember what number 3 was. Number 2 is, when you said the canned food thing, that really stuck with me. And it's partially, I'm giving shout outs to my parents a lot today, but my dad he makes this comment of, your generation is there to fix the things that we fix the problems we created. And I think that is also something related in terms of food, is like preserving food was an innovation. And it served a purpose of, like, back in the day when you're in an area where you couldn't grow food in the winter, like, oh wow, we have this new thing, we can preserve things. Like TV dinners was a similar thing. Like these were solving a problem for the time. And so it's like, I can't be angry at the problem we were solving, but then it's up to us to now move towards, again, that education, solving the problems that were created from those solutions. Right. And, unfortunately I have strong feelings about, that the people up high don't want that education to happen. Because imagine our economy if pharmaceuticals were no longer needed.
Right.
So they want to keep us unhealthy. They are going to continue to encourage us to eat processed food, the quick fix. They are 100% driving our education around food.
Yeah. Gosh, you bring up so much. The food pyramid. We're the same age, right? You grew up during the era of the food pyramid.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't know, if you're still hearing about the food pyramid, or if you haven't heard about the food pyramid, it was the government's way of trying to tell us how to eat healthy. And right, it was a pyramid, it was a triangle, and at the bottom was carbs, right? Carbs and grain, right? I'm pretty sure carbs and grain, and at the very top, right? So and it symbolized how much of it you're supposed to eat, right? At the base of the pyramid is all this carbs and grain that you're supposed to eat, and then at the very top of it was fat, and it was so wrong. Like, no, like the food pyramid was terrible, and I think you make a really valid point that are they. Some people might think it's like conspiracy theory-esque. Like, are they trying to keep us unhealthy? Probably. I think so, right? I definitely buy into that, right? Because I agree, pharmaceuticals are huge. And that brings into another point when me and my friends, we argue, right? We're still friends. We banter back and forth about politics and healthcare. And I'm not going to get into healthcare right now. But the biggest thing that I always say is what we think healthcare is not healthcare, right? The health insurance, right? Being when you get sick, and granted, right, you get sick and things happen, and I'm not discounting that, but healthcare is what you eat now. Eating those whole foods. It's getting on your bike and going for a bike ride and going for a walk and running and lifting weights. That's healthcare. That's showing that you care about your health. and you want to change it, right? This thing that is sold to us that we have to pay for to take care of us is not healthcare, right? I'm a big believer. We have these health savings accounts if you're in like the corporate world where you can put money in and you get to use that money tax free on pharmaceuticals, on things that are considered, right, taking care of your health. But I've said, right, like if I were to run for president, right, like I would let you use those things to buy local food, buy whole food, you want to buy a bike to go ride your bike, you want to buy a gym membership, right? Those
I
are the
think you
things.
can use gym. I would look into it.
I think you can for gym memberships.
I also told someone they could read it. You wouldn't be like working the system, but like you might be able to write off some of like a jacuzzi if you have like like issues with your body. Like heat therapy is anyway.
Yeah, no,
Just
you're right.
be
So,
like don't like we talked about earlier. Like read about it, look into it, like see what's possible with those accounts, you know.
Yep. We have a sauna we have a home gym in our house. Best investment I've ever made. Home gym in our house, and we have a dry sauna, an infrared sauna in our basement in our home gym, and that is it's amazing. But why couldn't I write that off? Right? Why do I not? Why can I not use tax-free money? That's healthcare. Right? Those are the things that I'm doing to take care of me. And I'm hoping that I don't have to use my health insurance, right? And use the pharmaceuticals, right? I'm trying to prevent that. And I'm not, right? Like, we might send people off in a tizzy, right? I'm not saying health issues don't happen, but again, we need to come from a place of listening versus hearing, right? Hearing is sorry, my dog's in here, and like honestly I'm getting really annoyed right now. I've been annoyed. And right, like we're here to talk and be honest. I'm just gonna be fucking honest, right? My dogs are like so fucking active right now. They're like in and out. They're shaking their collars. I love my dogs to death, right? And they mean no harm. They don't know anything. But they're like shaking their collars, and I'm just like, oh my god, right? Like that's my problem, not theirs. But yeah. My dog's in here, so cute, chewing on a rubber toy. She's so adorable. I love her to death. But yeah, why am I getting fucking annoyed? Alan, stop it. Like, you're an idiot. Breathe. Anyway, what the fuck was I talking about?
I forgot. Your
home gym. I don't know. I was ranting. Home gym, right? Healthcare. Just, take care of yourselves.
Yeah.
And it isn't, I'm not trying to be preachy, and I know you're not trying to be preachy. Like for me, like I have so much more room to grow. So much more opportunity to figure out, my diet and my relationship with food and Oreos and, so just, take care of yourselves. That's my ultimate message is listen to your body, like get in tune with your body. We've said it, and, listen to what your body's telling you. There are these new doctors out there, functional medicine doctors. I don't know if you've heard about them. So my wife has an autoimmune disease, and we started seeing a functional medicine doctor, and it was really interesting because the first thing that the functional medicine doctor started doing was started testing food allergies and blood work and how the blood responds to the food entering your system and things that you should eat, things that you shouldn't eat. It wasn't going to medicine. So it was really an interesting perspective how we're bringing, I think we're starting to realize Western medicine is good, right? It has its benefits, right? I'm not dogging on Western medicine. I think we need a balance between Western and Eastern medicine, and I think we're getting that with functional medicine. Is we're looking more at, the more holistic things and what we're putting into our body, what we're consuming, and how our bodies are responding to it.
Yeah. I think there's like a part 2 to this like that we can just continue to spin off on
Yeah,
it.
for
Like
sure.
there's just a lot that even came up in the last 20 minutes where I'm like, oh man, well, this could be a whole nother hour.
Oh yeah, for
But
sure.
I want to like highlight, and I can't remember the exact word you said, but I'm going to say compassion, right? For wherever you are, because whatever your journey is or where you want to be going in your relationship with food and health is you're not there right now, but you're only living in right now. And so having compassion for where you are right now, because stress and mental health, it's we can't address these things individually. And so
Yep.
beating yourself up about where you are right now is not going to help you get to where you want to go. And so always in the journey having compassion. And
Yeah.
I think like even like I mentioned, like that 15 to 20 pounds that I gained last year, it was almost when I finally just like stopped caring about the fact that I had gained that, like I was pretty like hard on myself.
Yep.
And had a tough time like getting back on certain things, and then it just like it was that compassion component that was missing. And as soon as I was like, this is where I'm at, and it was like letting go and just actually like doing the things every single day that make me feel good. I mean, we talked about in resolutions, like who do you want to be every day? And
Yeah.
that is, start there. Don't start at, I want to lose those 20 pounds or 50 pounds, or I want to be this person. Start about how do you want to show up every single day and make those small choices every single day.
Yep.
And that builds the momentum. And then that makes you feel good, right? And when you feel good, you're making better decisions. Like it's all connected in all this kind of chain of events through that process. So
Yeah, everything is connected, right? Like, yeah, when you think about it and anatomically, oh, my foot hurts. A lot of the times the issue's in the hip, right? And you can't just address one issue.
yeah.
You have to address your whole being, right? Like your mental health. You said it, right? Your mental health is so important, and take care of that. And but there's times where you, like for me anyway, when my mental health is not good, I still know the shot protocol that I have to go through, right? Back to my shot protocol with rifle hunting or bow hunting, right? I have a life protocol, and even when my mental health is suffering, I know my protocol that I have to go through, and I go through it. And I make those movements whether I want to or not, and it's like, I don't want to do it, and I do it anyway because I know what's right, and I know it's going to make me feel better. I know if I do the opposite, right? There's times where I give in, and I'll just eat the pizza, and then I pay for it, or and it just it's a slippery slope. And yeah, I think you make a really good point that everything's connected, and we really have to sympathize and empathize with ourselves, and know that you matter and you're awesome.
Yeah.
And
if you if you don't have those protocols, or you do and it's hard and it's not working, ask for help. I think I think we could definitely have an episode to share our own experiences with the ups and downs in life, and those shot protocols that we have. But for now, just really ask for help. There's a lot of resources too, where you can remain anonymous online for like suicide prevention. And I know Crisis Text Line is a texting service. So if you don't feel comfortable reaching out to a friend, reach out to any of those offerings. So
for sure.
But
So I know we've been talking for some time. I do still want to talk one thing about the cultural. I don't want to end without just at least like skimming the surface on this cultural thing with food,
okay.
especially with yoga and the term ahimsa. We mentioned it on the first episode. Ahimsa is this idea of non-violence. Right. So Sanskrit is the word ahimsa. Sanskrit's the language, this ancient language, and the translations for most things doesn't have a direct translation. So we roughly translate these words to something that we understand. And for ahimsa, in the yoga culture, and even in like the Hindu and Buddhist cultures, that the word exists, and it translates roughly into like non-violence
Or non-harming.
Non-harming,
Mm-hmm.
right? You'll hear different definitions because there's no word for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting how, right, we interpret it, and we all interpret it differently. But it doesn't say non-harming to animals, right? Like there's this, like, I need to be a vegetarian, I need to be a vegan in this culture because of ahimsa. Well, ahimsa, it's just non-harming.
Mm-hmm.
And non-harming means not harming yourself
Mm-hmm.
too, right? And there's, going back to this ecosystem, there's an ecosystem that's at play. And we can't take the pieces out of it and expect there not to be harm done to someone or something. And a lot of people, and I've had this conversation over Thanksgiving dinner one year with some. Right, we had a Thanksgiving dinner one year where friends just invited friends, and
Mm-hmm.
I had strangers sitting in my house eating at the dinner table, and we were talking a little bit about this and how she got into like the yoga culture. She was eating meat. She heard about this ahimsa, stopped eating meat, and then eventually went back to eating meat. And the reason she went back to eating meat is because she had lost a bunch of weight. She wasn't getting the nutrients. She became anemic. All this stuff that happened for ahimsa, to not harm animals, and yet she just continued to harm herself, and she realized like, oh, I can't do this. And I don't know if there was like a battle between herself about ahimsa and then going back to eating meat, but in my mind it's non-harming, right? Like, yeah, sure, like we should always assume like to not harm the people that we interact with and animals. And when I'm hunting, I want to be as merciful as possible. And I shared a story last episode where I didn't, and that's upsetting. And so being a hunter and being a yogi, they coincide, right? Because when it comes to non-harming, I want to make sure I'm not harming myself and not harming others. But there is a process where things need to die, and whether that be plants, as you mentioned, like the spirit of plants, like need to die, so I'm not harming myself, and not harming others. So I think that the cultural aspect of food and diets is really interesting. I have some friends from India that is supposed to be vegetarian and he's not. So I think it's just really interesting how culture can play this role of, and ahimsa ties into that. But
yeah, and I think
that's my thoughts.
Like with ahimsa, I agree. I think I definitely feel like when I was learning about it, a lot of it was like self, like others and self, right? And and that's also not to like, I don't know the intricacies of it from a native like someone native of India's perspective, and that would be really nice to hear, whether that came from ahimsa or if there's other beliefs within it that kind of led to vegetarian culture. And I know my buddy who is from there who had brought up the accessibility component, and his response to the vegetarianism is it was accessibility in terms of cost and access to it. And so it is a very layered conversation, because again, there's cultural, there's just so many pieces to it. And and I think it's just being open to, like, letting people make their decisions, but then as an individual, like, know your whys behind it.
Right. And I just remembered what I was saying before I got frustrated earlier was the listening versus hearing. Right. It's, to your point, it's, your hearing is a anatomical thing that we do, right? Our ears, right? We hear things. But listening is like the comprehension of what we hear. And I think it's important to listen, right? And sometimes it goes against our beliefs and our values, but sometimes that's where we grow and we have the opportunity to learn. And this boy from New York City who's getting right, chickens come from the supermarket, clearly, duh, right? Like, but I was willing to listen, and that's not where chickens come from. That's not where beef comes from. So I think that really just being open and ready to listen to different perspectives and views is really important. Holy shit, we've talked for a while.
I know, and I do feel like there should be a part 2, because there's a lot that we didn't get to touch on, but
I want crowd input for part 2. So for those of you listening, I would like questions or thoughts, and I don't know, maybe ideas. If you want us to bring a guest on, maybe we can get our friend from India to join or something. But yeah, there's so much to this. I think we did uncover a lot, and we didn't get to it all.
Yeah, we didn't get to a lot too. Yeah, maybe it's even just a couple maybe just we'll snippet some guests. I had a lot of people on Instagram reach out when I mentioned this conversation, and some people who have a lot of, even I had conversations with them and we didn't touch it here, that I would love to bring in. So
yeah, that'd be really cool.
If it's something you feel passionate, if you're listening and you feel passionate about and you want to share a, expert perspective on it, whether it's from personal experience or research or it's your job, let us know. And anything else to touch on, because I had something from hunting I wanted to touch on and I didn't. We also didn't touch on conservation.
Yeah.
So conservation can
much.
be its own episode. We'll bring hunting back.
So many people are going to hear the story. Well, maybe not, but there's a lot of people that hear about hunting and it's just the big bad man with the gun. And
we'll talk.
We'll talk about that on a different episode.
Yeah.
So please,
journal
if
prompt.
You heard this, journal prompt.
We can keep going.
So keep going. Bree, I want to keep going. I want to keep going, Bree.
I know.
See this, and this is why we recorded, because we love talking and we just get carried away, and it's always great talking with you, Bree. So journal prompt. Grab your journals and just, what's on your mind? What have you been thinking about this episode? What have you been thinking about in our spewing and rambling of all this stuff that we've talked about, hunting and food and access and
what's your relationship with food?
Yeah. What do you think you want your relationship with food to be? Right? Because what it is and what maybe you want it to be are two different things. And then what you think you want it to be is something different as well. If there's goals that you want to hit, write them down and just know, write this down too. Write this specifically down. Show yourself empathy. Show yourself grace, and just try new things and just take care of yourself. Grab your journal and just write. We've said a lot, and reach out to us in the show notes. The information's there. You can find us on social media. All the information is in our show intros and outros. Have a kick-ass day, night, whatever you listen to this. Bree, God, I love talking to you.
I
It
know.
is so great talking to you.
Go forever. We need like a whole day. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, for real. We totally could.
And
But
congrats on your,
thank
it was
you
so
so
exciting
much.
to see that. Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, thanks so much, and tune in for the next episode coming up.
Yeah, see you when we see you.
Yep.
If you want to follow us and our adventures, you can find both of us on Instagram. I'm at Bree Allison. That's BreAllison.
And I am at The Life of Alan Tatone, underscores between each word. To check out our offerings, yoga, one-on-one trainings, workshops, retreats, and a recorded library, you can find the info on our website, thehunterandthehippie.com.
If you have questions for the podcast, about the podcast, feedback, suggestions, or just want to say hi or find ways to work with us, our email is thehunterandthehippie@gmail.com. And don't worry, all of this will be in our show notes.
Thanks for tuning in
Hopefully you weren't tuned out.
to the Hunter and the Hippie podcast.